I love will find you. And who's that?
I have two kids, a little girl named Bella and a little boy named Joseph. So I needed to take him to school, the daycare. As we were walking there, I actually fainted. I don't even remember it. I was severely anemic. I just kept attributing to the fact that I'm a new mom. I meet with my GI doctor, and I walked in the room and saw her face, like she was clearly upset. And I actually saw on the computer screen that tumor, and I think it was 3.93 inches. And she had to deliver the news that I had a rare form of pancreatic cancer. She was so kind, and she was crying with me, and I just said, I have a husband and I have two little kids. I have to live. When you're diagnosed with cancer, you instantly start Googling, but I stumbled upon the Lustgarten Foundation. The survivor stories were so inspiring to me. I actually found people that lived, and I remember reading them over and over and over again and saying, like, I'm gonna be there, I'm gonna survive, I'm gonna beat this, I'm gonna spread hope. Tomorrow's a new day. Anything can happen, anything is possible. Tomorrow there could be a cure for pancreatic cancer tomorrow. That became my mantra through the rest of my cancer journey. After the 5th cycle of chemo, my surgeon said, okay, unfortunately, again, your tumor did not shrink, but I'm gonna go for it. My oncologist said, I just want you to know that only 4 hospitals in the country would have even performed the surgery that he did. He saved my life. I want to help other people, and again, I'm so grateful to be alive.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Linda Tintawi, CEO of the Lustgarten Foundation, and welcome to today's Lustgarten Live in celebration of International Women's Day. We are so honored to have you meet 3 rising stars from the pancreatic cancer research community. You will also meet our 2022 Ruth Bader Ginsburg Career Development Award recipient, and you will meet some of the greatest minds in cancer research, or as we call them, Lustgarten luminaries. For me, every day is International Women's Day. Our Chief Medical Advisor, Liz Jaffe, provides the Pancreatic Cancer Research Community with tremendous leadership. And this community of excellence is powered by so many tenacious, brave, beautiful women who are beautiful in so many ways. The change starts with us, and we know that's the way it always is. Change starts with the women in our community. And before we begin today, we encourage your questions. You can type them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer them throughout today's symposium. Today's event is being recorded and will be available soon on lustgarten.org/live. And now to our first session, which I'm so excited about. Dr. Jennifer Knox is a professor of medicine at the University of Toronto and leads the Solid Tumor Medical Oncology Group at Princess Margaret Cancer Center. She is also the co-director of the McCain Center for Pancreatic Cancer and the principal investigator of the PASS-01 trial, one of the largest clinical trials in the Lustgarten's research portfolio. We are so proud of her leadership and so proud that she is joining us here today. Welcome, Dr. Knox.
Thank you so much, Linda. What an honor to be included on this kind of webinar for International Day of the Woman. I have the particular pleasure of being able to introduce our audience to our 3 rising stars in pancreatic cancer research. So welcome, everyone. During today's session, we are going to learn more about your respective areas of focus and how you began your remarkable journeys. I'm going to introduce all of you first, and then you'll proceed with your slideshows. Could I ask you each, just before you start your slideshows, just to say in a sentence or two, what brought you to wanting to do research in pancreatic cancer, just so we hear that little personal touch. So to get started, first let me introduce Dr. Zhiwen Wang, who is a physician scientist working on developing methods for the early detection of pancreatic cancer in the Vogelstein and Kenneth Kinsler lab at Johns Hopkins Sidney Kimmel Comprehensive Cancer Center. Dr. Wang obtained her medical degree and her PhD degrees from Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, and then subsequently completed her internal medicine residency there as well. Currently, she is a third-year medical oncology fellow also at Johns Hopkins. Next, we have Dr. Andressa Diaz-Costa, who is a surgical pathologist and a postdoctoral research fellow in the lab of Dr. Brian Wolfin and Dr. Jonathan Nowak's laboratory at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston. Her research is focused on artificial intelligence or AI-driven digital pathology and how we can apply that to pancreatic cancer. And third, Dr. Catherine Bever is an assistant professor of medical oncology, also at the Sidney Kimmel Comprehensive Cancer Center at Johns Hopkins. She completed her oncology fellowship training there. She specializes in the care of patients with gastrointestinal cancers and is a clinical and a translational researcher overseeing several different investigator-initiated trials. Particular interest is in using novel therapeutic combinations to promote anti-tumor immunity in cold pancreatic tumors like pancreatic cancer and other traditionally immune-resistant cancers. So welcome everybody, and we'll get started with Dr. Wang.
Thank you, Dr. Knox. Such an honor to be here today. I'm very excited to talk about my work. I'm going to share screen now, and may I just confirm that this is visible on your screen as well, the presentation. Okay, thank you. So first, to address the question of what motivates me to do the research that I do. So as Dr. Knox mentioned, I'm an oncology fellow at Hopkins, training under Dr. Vogelstein and Kinsler. And I think one of the hardest things for me as a medical student, then resident and oncology fellow here, is to tell a patient with pancreatic cancer when they're diagnosed that their disease is late stage. And even with our best treatments and therapies and efforts, we're not able to cure their cancer, and we can only try to prevent it from getting bigger. And the patients who I have seen who have done really well are the ones who often were fortunate enough to have an earlier diagnosis, early enough often to have surgery to completely remove the tumor. So this motivates me to develop a test that could detect pancreatic cancer earlier at a stage where it's more curable. And I will tell you about some of our effort, prior work, and current work that's going on in the lab. So I think all of us probably have seen this slide. This is from the SEER database. It's showing that the majority of the pancreatic cancer patients are diagnosed when the disease is already stage 4, when the cancer has already metastasized to distant organs. This is a stage where it's very challenging. As a medical oncologist, I see most patients who are at this stage, and the best that we can hope for, as I briefly mentioned, is to control the tumor, but there's no cure at that stage. A very small fraction, about 12% of the cancer are diagnosed when the tumor is still localized at one part of the body. So those are the patients who could potentially have a curative surgery to remove the tumor. And if we look at the outcome in terms of the 5-year survival for pancreatic cancer, and this is shown on the y-axis here, when the tumor is still localized, the 5-year survival is almost 50%. And comparing this to when the disease is already later stage, such as stage 4, when there's already distant metastases, survival is very, very low, only about 3%. So this is, just showing that if we were able to detect this pancreatic cancer earlier, patients will have better outcome. We have more treatment options, and they likely will have better survival. So one way that we are trying to develop a test for pancreatic cancer is using what we call liquid biopsy. This is a blood test, so it's non-invasive, can be easily collected in the clinic. to detect various tumors. We're able to do this because tumors shed DNA into the bloodstream. So these DNA fragments contain characteristics that are specific for the tumor, such as mutations, or as I'll tell you later, a methylation pattern. So this tumor DNA, it's very short-lived. It only lasts for about minutes to a couple hours in the bloodstream. So it's quite a challenge to detect them. We often compare this to looking for a needle in the haystack. So the good thing about this is that we can sample the blood, and this is a real-time sampling of the tumor burden. The CancerSeek study is something our lab conducted back in 2018. We looked at 8 tumor types, including pancreatic cancer. Here, because of the lack of reliable markers and the fact that it's often diagnosed late. And this is a blood test where we looked at regions that are frequently mutated in these tumor types in 16 genes of interest. This included over 1,000 patients who had non-metastatic cancers. So in other words, stage 1, 2, or 3, not 4. So all what we think as earlier stage tumors. And for pancreatic cancers, we were able to detect close to 70% of them. And I'm not showing it here, but we also included over 800 normal individuals, and less than 1% of them were positive. So we were very encouraged by the results of this study. And we asked ourselves, how can we do better, especially if we're trying to detect earlier stage cancers? One way we could do so is by going beyond the mutations that we've been using. So this is a paper from my mentor, Bert Vogelstein, and also Andy Feinberg from 1983. In this paper, it's mentioned that aside from mutations, gene rearrangements, which we also study, and particularly changes in methylation, can play a role in tumor genesis. And this is more for the scientists in the group. So methylation in DNA commonly is associated with the 5-methylcytosine in the context of a CpG. So these methylated cytosines frequently occur in the promoter region of genes. And we've learned in our biology classes that when the promoter is methylated, such as in colon cancer, same in pancreatic cancer, the gene is silenced. So this is something that is characteristic for tumors, including pancreatic tumors. And it's something like mutations can be used as a marker. Also, something about methylation that's very special is that it can be very specific for the tissue type. So in a way, it's a fingerprint of where the DNA could be coming from. So a DNA fragment from a skin cell has a very different methylation pattern from a DNA fragment coming from the pancreas. So that's something we could also use to our advantage in terms of a detection test. I will spend less than 1 minute on the technical details, but I wanted to share a little bit of an overview for our current work. This is currently unpublished. It's been accepted right now at this stage, but I wanted to tell you about it, given this is what I'm currently working on in the lab. So the way we wanted to detect methylation in addition to mutation is by taking a DNA, double-strand DNA molecule. So here we have the Watson and the Crick strand, making a copy of each strand, so indicated here on the lower panel. And in the copy strand, which is shown now on the left side, we can isolate them, and they will still preserve the mutation pattern in the DNA fragments. So we can still identify the mutations as we do now. But from the original strands, which we also have, we can look for methylation, or in other words, epigenetic changes. And using this here, we can identify where the DNA fragment came from. So either from the pancreas or from the liver or from the colon. So the combination of these two analyses is quite powerful because one, it allows us to detect the mutation that could indicate the presence of cancer in the body. Two, it can also allow us to localize the likely tumor in the body. And And I just have a couple more slides that just with some preliminary data. So we applied this to stage 1 and 2 cancer patients, including 91 patients with pancreatic cancer. These are all resectable pancreatic cancer patients. And we were able to detect the mutation in over half of the patients, which was quite encouraging. And then looking at the methylation portion of the assay, we applied this to just healthy individuals, and we took their blood, tried to look for where the DNA came from. And this pattern now shown on the y-axis indicates the percent of contribution from various tissue types. We found the expected pattern, which is most of the DNA comes from neutrophils, and then the lymphocytes, including the T cells and the B cells. And if for the immunologists in the group, this is a pattern that would be expected in healthy individuals, so 2-to-1 ratio of neutrophils to lymphocytes. So we were quite encouraged by these data, and what we hope is that, this is a technique that can be easily applied to any current protocol for making DNA that's collected from plasma. So minimal variation will be required to apply this technology. And we hope that this will become a screening test that not only can identify a tumor in the body, but it can also inform the patient and the clinician where the DNA likely came from to help guide next steps in management. So I want to thank my lab, especially my mentors, Dr. Bert Vogelstein and Dr. Kinsler, and of course, all of our patients and their families who participated in the study and motivated me to do the work that I do every day. Thank you so much. Happy to take any questions.
So Dr. Diaz-Costa, we'll just go on to you now
Yes.
and remind us why you got into pancreas.
Good morning, everyone. So first of all, I'd like to start by thanking the Lois Gardner Foundation and the organizers for giving me the opportunity to talk on this event. It's really an honor to figure among such outstanding and brilliant women. And getting back to your question, my interest in gastrointestinal medicine started in med school back in Brazil. At that time, I thought I would pursue a career as a GI clinician. However, towards the end of med school, after spending a long time in pathology, which was my second area of interest, I decided to go after the anatomical pathology residency. And although I had great mentors in GI pathology during my residency, I only started working with pancreatic cancer a few years ago when I joined Dr. Brian Wolping and Dr. Jonathan Nowak's lab at the Dana-Farber. And honestly, I think it was a perfect match. They're great mentors, and I am a very enthusiastic pathologist. So in addition, pancreatic cancer is such a challenging and fascinating disease. So since then, I've been working on multiple projects involving AI-driven pathology in pancreatic cancer. So I'll be sharing my screen now. So just wanted to confirm you're seeing my screen. So pancreatic cancer is unfortunately a disease that is not uncommon. And when I talk about pancreatic cancer, I refer to its most common type, which is pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma, or PDAC, which accounts for about 90% of all pancreatic cancer. And unfortunately, PDAC is the third leading cause of cancer-related death in the US. So from the left to the right, the diagram shows the natural course of cancer in general, where the appearance of symptoms is followed by the diagnosis, leading to the choice of therapy and regimen. If treatment is effective, the disease can be cured or remain stable. Otherwise, it will result in disease progression. And why PDAC is so problematic? So the answer is that challenges can be found in each of these phases. So pancreas cancer associates with the late onset of symptoms. So it has time to progress before being noticed. The precancerous lesions in PDAC are frequent but often underestimated, so they cannot be visualized by CAT scan or MRI. In addition, there is a lack of specific screening and diagnostic tools. There are also limited effective treatment options and a relatively low response rate, leading to a modest improvement in survival. On the other hand, there have been many efforts to make pancreatic cancer a curable disease. Some of these efforts focus on sorry.
Andressa, can I just
Yeah,
interrupt you and show
so
you
yeah.
screen? Yeah.
So some of these efforts concentrated in improving early detection and a better understanding of precancerous lesions. In addition, improvement in tumor characterization can lead to a better choice in tumor treatment, the so-called precision medicine, aiming for survival improvement. And this is the focus of the work I will be sharing with you today. Yeah. So pancreatic cancer is a complex system this figure represents pancreatic cancer cells as part of a large microenvironment that is composed of several vessels, cells, and other components. This environment, the tumor microenvironment, is responsible for supporting cancer cells. So there is a bilateral relationship where cancer cells can change its microenvironment, and the microenvironment can affect how cancer cells can grow and spread. Immune cells have a key role in this relationship, favoring or attacking cancer cells. In addition, immune cells are also spatially organized. Thus, the knowledge of this system can assist in the design of better therapies. Surgical resection offers the only chance of cure in pancreatic cancer. However, it only applies to patients with localized disease that represents only 10 to 20% of the patients. Additionally, clinical trials have demonstrated a survival benefit with the addition of adjuvant chemotherapy or chemotherapy after surgery. On the other hand, patients who present with localized disease are increasingly treated with neoadjuvant chemotherapy or chemotherapy applied before surgery to facilitate tumor shrink and potentially improve survival. However, this impact on the tumor immune microenvironment is incompletely understood. Thus, my work focused on understanding how chemotherapy before surgery would affect the microenvironment where cancer is localized. To do that, I first started by characterizing pancreatic cancer in around 300 patients from multiple institutions across the US that underwent upfront surgery. I then compared it with patients that were treated with chemotherapy before surgery. I applied multispectral digital image analysis and supervised machine learning to identify the main immune cell population in the pancreatic cancer microenvironment. So for this analysis, I stained multiple pieces of different tumors in a TMA slide with 9 markers combined in a cocktail. Next, digital image analysis was acquired using an automated multispectral system from Akoya. And then after image acquisition and spectral unmixing, I trained the computer to replicate my expertise as a pathologist to recognize different tumor tissue areas and different cells, and to identify each one by phenotype. So this is an example of the output of this analysis. On the left, on the multispectral imaging, shows multiple colors representing each marker from the panel. However, I trained the computer to count for every individual cell and provide a quantitative measurement, as observed on the right. So with that, after characterizing the millions of cells, I was able to define the landscape of immune cells in PDAC, which was revealed to be very heterogeneous with many or few good and bad cells. Although you can see a qualitative difference in these pictures, it was actually my expertise in the top of the artificial intelligence that allowed meaningful results. So next, I use the mathematical approach using densities of the major non-overlapping immune cells to look for common patterns. This approach found that tumors have one of 4 different immune cell infiltration patterns that were characterized by different relative abundance between immune cells with pro and anti-tumor effects, or bad or good behavior. Interestingly, the group characterized by more good cells and few bad cells associated with better survival, suggesting that the relative balance between good and bad immune cells is more important in defining the patient's survival in localized PDAC than individual cells quantities. So interestingly, when I included the neoadjuvant treated tumors in these unsupervised clusters analysis, most neoadjuvant treated tumors clustered into the group associated with better survival, which was also the less common of the 4 groups in upfront resected tumors. These observations about neoadjuvant treated cases being dominated by this cluster are therefore unlikely to have occurred by chance. In addition, it suggested that the immune microenvironment after neoadjuvant therapy was similar to that associated with the better outcomes in patients treated with upfront surgery, with a more favorable environment. So in addition, neoadjuvant treatment also influenced the spatial distribution. This was more evident for good cells named M1 macrophages that are visualized here on the right, on the left, by green and by cyan and green colors, and in the figure on the left. So chemotherapy given before surgery associated with these good cells that here represented in cyan on this right picture, being closer to cancer cells that are represented in orange here, compared with those that only underwent treatment with surgery. And finally, in patients with better histological response in chemotherapy, it means patients in which tumor decreased in size in tissue samples after treatment, or good responders that are in the top figure, good cells in green and cyan in the left, and in cyan on the right were more abundant and localized closer to cancer cells. In these pictures, you can literally see M1 macrophages, which are the good cells, invading and destroying tumor cells that are in orange in the top figure. So in summary, pancreatic cancer is a heterogeneous disease because not only the total immune cell quantities varied a lot across patients, but the relative balance between good and bad cells varied as well. And this directly influenced the patient's survival. Neoadjuvant therapy is associated with a favorable anti-tumor immune microenvironment with many good and few bad cells in comparison with upfront surgically treated patients. And immune cell density and location associates with better response to therapy. Taken together, these finds are influenced the design of new treatment strategies. And as an example, results from my studies in the characterization of PDAC landscape contributed to the design of this new clinical trial, a neoadjuvant TGF-beta clinical trial that opened earlier this year at Dana-Farber, and that targets tumor immune cell transcriptional subtyping using TGF-beta inhibition on top of FOLFIRINOX, which was the main chemotherapy agents that I used on neoadjuvant analysis. When we have then we will have an opportunity to validate my previous findings in understanding the tumor immune microenvironment dynamics in PDAC. Thank you. Happy to take questions.
We'll move now to Dr. Bever.
Thank you so much. I'll share my screen.
And tell us what drew you into pancreas cancer research.
Yes. Yeah, thank you so much again to the organizers and to the Lustgarten Foundation for this invitation to participate today. I also feel very honored and humbled to be among so many incredible women scientists. Can somebody just confirm whether you're seeing the full screen view of my?
No, we're not
Okay,
seeing full screen yet.
okay. Thank you so much. In terms of how I ended up in pancreatic cancer research, it goes back to medical school. Actually, I had a research experience as a medical student in the lab of Dr. Elizabeth Jaffe, who I continue to work with now. But it was a combination of just really wonderful mentorship and exciting science, starting as a medical student. And I remember towards the end of that year of research going to one of the large cancer meetings and seeing a presentation. It was actually the presentation of FOLFIRINOX as a new treatment for pancreatic cancer, and just the way the audience stood up at the end of the talk and gave it a standing ovation was something really moving to me. And I think, again, very humbling that this is really such a tough cancer, and my experiences with patients as well, of course, have driven me to stick with it. I wanted to start by just kind of some background on cancer immunotherapy, which is the focus of my research. Again, I'm a medical oncologist by training, and my focus is in gastrointestinal cancers, particularly pancreatic cancer, but trying to develop new treatments for patients that incorporate immunotherapy in traditionally immune refractory diseases. So just some background, cancer immunotherapy is based on the premise that the immune system should be able to recognize cancer cells as abnormal and remove them in the same way that it recognizes pathogens and other kind of disease cells. But of course, in some cases that doesn't happen. And we now know that cancers can exploit these normal immune tolerance mechanisms that are present in the body that we need to prevent autoimmunity and dampen overexuberant immune responses. But cancer has unfortunately figured out a way to hijack these normal mechanisms and suppress the immune response against the cancer. And that one of the main ways it does this is through these immune checkpoints. So we now have at our disposal several immune checkpoint inhibitors, which work remarkably well in certain types of cancers, such as melanoma and lung cancer. These are sometimes referred to as hot tumors, because when we look under the microscope, we see that they, even before immunotherapy, have a lot of immune cell infiltration and inflammation. They're very immune active tumors, and those tend to respond quite well to immune checkpoint inhibitors. On the other hand, pancreas cancer is kind of the prototypical immune cold tumor. It very rarely has a response to immune checkpoint inhibitors alone. And the reasons for this are probably multifactorial, and in part due to what we know about pancreas cancer cells, that they tend not to have very many mutations, so perhaps don't look abnormal enough to the immune system. But also there is this very unique microenvironment of pancreatic cancer, which Dr. Costa alluded to as well. When we look under the microscope at these tumors, we see that they don't tend to have a lot of infiltration by these T cells and B cells, which are the cells we think are important for an effective immune attack. But rather we see this dense fibrotic stroma around the tumor and heavy infiltration by these immunosuppressive elements. So Dr. Jaffe, I mentioned, was my mentor as a medical student, and I've continued that relationship as a fellow and into my faculty position. In her group, they've spent several decades now working on developing a vaccine to treat pancreatic cancer, starting with this GVAX pancreas vaccine, which is similar to some of the other vaccines we use for infectious diseases, basically delivering cancer cells to the patient in the presence of an adjuvant to stimulate the immune system. Subsequently, there was a second vaccine that was combined with GVAX. This is sometimes referred to as CRS-207, but this is a bacteria-based vaccine. So it's taking a bacteria called Listeria monocytogenes, which is modified to secrete a protein called mesothelin, which is thought to be important for the immune response to pancreatic cancer. And so these were combined in this kind of prime boost strategy for pancreatic cancer treatment. And what we learned from those early studies of the vaccines is that there was a positive effect on the immune response, but we were also seeing upregulation of immune checkpoints. So there was kind of this compensatory response to, again, dampen the anti-tumor immune response. And so subsequently, we've conducted clinical trials testing the vaccines with immune checkpoint inhibitors. And what we've seen overall is, again, not enough activity to move forward with these combinations, but we have seen these rare patients who have real responses. And this is an example of a patient who is on a trial of vaccine plus 2 immune checkpoint inhibitors who had both a reduction in tumor size as well as a reduction in the blood-based cancer marker that was really quite durable over greater than 1 year. So these small signals of benefit suggest to us that pancreatic cancer can be made to be immune responsive cancer, but that in the majority of patients, it likely requires additional immune modulating agents. So from some work done by my colleagues who have done a lot of studies looking at the pancreas microenvironment in patients who receive these regimens, what has emerged is that there is this class of immune cells, which we refer to as monocytes and macrophages, an immunosuppressive type of cell that seems to correlate with lack of benefit from these types of treatments. And so we hypothesized we could target those cells as well in the combination, that we might be able to enhance benefit for more patients. And it turns out there are a lot of drugs out there that are trying to target this type of immune cell in different ways. And so we came up with this platform study design, which we hope will help us to rapidly evaluate different monocyte and macrophage targeting agents in combination with the vaccine and immune checkpoint inhibitor. And the idea being that we would test different combinations and have an interim analysis where we could look at the data we have, also looking at patient samples and mouse model data, which has been led by my colleague Wanjin Ho and Alana Fertig, also on the bench side, to really comprehensively look at the data and decide which treatments are promising, and hopefully identify other potential targets for treatment. So this is the latest arm of this platform study, which is ongoing. And this is a study which is supported by the Lustgarten Foundation, which is enrolling in patients with metastatic pancreas cancer who have received at at least one prior systemic therapy. Patients are given the Listeria vaccine that I mentioned, CRS-207, along with 2 immune checkpoint inhibitors, pembrolizumab and ipilimumab, and then a 4th drug called tadalafil, which is actually a commercially available oral medication that's approved for other non-oncologic indications, but has been shown at least preclinically to have some immunomodulatory effects on the monocytes and macrophages. And so this trial is open and enrollment is ongoing. Our primary endpoint is objective response rate and secondary endpoint safety and toxicities. And we have a number of exploratory endpoints that we're planning, evaluating patients' blood samples and biopsy samples, which we hope will provide insights into how these treatments modify the tumor microenvironment and the anti-tumor immune response, and why patients do or do not benefit from this therapy. And again, hopefully to open up other avenues, other potential targets for treatment down the road. So that's the conclusion of my talk, and I just wanted to acknowledge my colleagues who have helped with this work, and also my funders, the Lustgarten Foundation included. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for those really thought-provoking talks. I wonder if we have about 4 minutes. I wonder if we could maybe take a couple minutes for some questions. There was one, the first question for Dr. Wang. There was a question from the audience about where can I get a hold of some tumor testing, blood assay now. So maybe I'd ask you to comment on, whether you think this is ready for prime time, and perhaps what trial or what mechanism, perhaps Lustgarten supported that they could access to add to this body of research. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for that question. It's always nice to know there's interest in using our work. So I have shown some preliminary data that we're very excited about. Our next step is to include more patients in retrospective studies to see what our sensitivity and specificity is. And it's, it's, as we all know, it's very exciting to move these tests forward, but we also want to make sure we're not, subjecting patients to unnecessary workup and invasive procedures if we're calling, cancer in patients who do not have cancer. So we are very excited and want to move forward very quickly, but want to do so very cautiously. So there are studies that are supported by the Lustgarten Foundation that we're hoping to undertake very soon, and first retrospectively and then prospectively. So I would be very excited, hopefully in the near future, to update you all on bring this test to all of the patients in the clinic. But in the meantime, there are commercially available blood tests for especially patients who are already diagnosed with cancer. And I think, Dr. Beva and others would be very familiar, more so than I am, in terms of what's available for patients in the clinic already.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Costa, let me ask you, maybe put you a little bit on the spot. I fully recognize how important the pathologist is to trying to advance our understanding and fine-tuning treatments for pancreas cancer, and your work is beautiful. In the setting where you have a patient up front who potentially is curative, but there may be a trial in which data from your analysis may fine-tune which exact type of treatment they should probably get, because not one size fits all, and maybe the heterogeneity can be recognized and fine-tune the practice. How do we tell patients perhaps that it's worth waiting a little while, a few weeks maybe at most, to try to get that kind of information from a pathologist or the research before just, how patients want to move very quickly to get it out or get on treatment. Because it's one of the things that we struggle with a little bit all the time when we're trying to sort of biomarker select patients for different arms.
Yeah, I think right now the results from my from my work, it's basically are affecting mostly on the choosing of new designs for new therapies, but they are not going to decide which kind of treatment the patient will get at that time. So I think right now, as a surgical pathologist, I would say the pathologist would give the diagnosis, and then the follow-up would be at the responsibility of the clinical oncologist. But I think the main importance of my work is in design, in providing information to design better combinations in the future.
So once that data is available, it would probably be very worthwhile waiting
Yes,
a little
yes.
bit to get a more nuanced treatment.
Yeah, it is already influencing the design of new therapies here. As I mentioned, this new clinical trial opened at the beginning of the year for the Dana-Farber. But right now, I think as the role of a surgical pathologist is basically just giving the diagnosis, and then the patient will follow up with the clinician.
And then Dr. Bever, very exciting. I think you guys, really are making progress with the combination of vaccine and other drugs and checkpoint inhibitors. Can you maybe just comment, patients are very enthusiastic about immunotherapy and want it, and maybe you want to comment on why it's still worth doing the research and trying to fine tune that kind of therapy still on clinical trials.
Sure. Thank you for the question. Yeah, I think that as I mentioned or alluded to, we do see these rare responses for the majority of patients, at least in the combinations that we've fully evaluated so far. Patients do not respond. So I think that there's still definitely work to be done to try to increase the likelihood of benefit for patients. And, I think we have gained a lot of experience with immunotherapy in the last several years, but we know that these treatments are not completely benign. They do carry risks with them, particularly of autoimmune problems. And so we really want to understand, who is likely to benefit and try to select appropriately patients for this type of therapy once we found a combination that seems effective.
Thank you very much. So I think to stay on schedule, Linda, and that was a great session. I think I'll turn things back over to you. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Knox. And for everyone watching, that was such a deep dive into the science that is pushing pancreatic cancer research forward. And the Lustgarten Foundation is so proud of the work that we're supporting, the scientists that we fund, and the research that's being advanced. So I just want to thank all of these amazing scientists for sharing their deep thoughts and work and research with our community. Next up, I am thrilled to introduce you, though she actually needs no introduction. Dr. Danny Engel is well known to the Lustgarten Foundation community since she was a postdoc in Dr. Dave Tuvesen's lab, who is our chief scientist. And Danny was our first Ruth Bader Ginsburg Career Development awardee, and now she is here to introduce our next year's awardee. Dr. Engel is now an assistant professor in the Regulatory Biology Laboratory and holds the Helen McLaren Developmental Chair at the Salk Institute for Biological Studies. She's also an assistant adjunct professor in the section of Molecular Biology, Division of Biological Sciences at the University of California, San Diego. So Dr. Engel, I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Linda. And I also want to thank the Lustgarten Foundation for putting on this spectacular event. It's very inspiring to hear from all of these powerful women leaders. And it's also my honor to introduce the next up-and-coming rising star in pancreatic cancer, Dr. Ping-Ping Ho, who is a researcher in the Clinical Investigations and Precision Therapeutics program at Rutgers Cancer Institute and an assistant professor in the Department of Microbiology, Biochemistry, and Molecular Genetics at Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School. Dr. Ho's Ruth Bader Ginsburg Career Development Award is titled Anti-KRAS Therapy Resistance in Pancreatic Tumor Immune Microenvironment. Her work examines an immune cell population called tumor-associated macrophages that have been shown to cause resistance in therapy targeting KRAS, which drives the vast majority of pancreatic cancers. And so with that, without any further ado, Dr. Ho.
Dear friends, colleagues, and members of the Lasse Garten Foundation, I'm deeply honored and humbled to have been selected for this prestigious Career Development Award to recognize my pancreatic cancer research in honor of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a trailblazer who dedicated her life to fighting for gender equality and women's rights. Using her legal expertise, Justice Ginsburg helped to promote equal pay and equal opportunities for women in the workplace, strengthened protections against sexual harassment and assault in the working environment, and emphasized the importance of diversity and inclusion in every profession. Thanks to her notable contributions, the social environment today is more friendly for women, enabling us to be free to be you and me. However, there is still a long way to go to combat gender bias and achieve gender equality. Taking academia as an example, the latest data from the Association of American Medical Colleges shows that the percentage of women associate professors and higher in medical science is 50% lower than men. In addition, a study published in the Journal of Women's Health found that women are underrepresented in leadership positions in academic medicine, with women comprising only 22% of department chairs, 15% of deans, and 16% of executive officers at medical schools in the United States. The glass ceiling for women is obvious. People tend to view women as less competent and authoritative than men, even when they are equally qualified and accomplished. The unconscious bias against women can affect hiring decisions, promotions, and other opportunities for women in the workplace. Early-stage women researchers especially need recognition in academia to increase the visibility of their excellent work, establish networks and collaborations, and prepare for gaining power in the future to break down barriers for women and encourage more women scientists to achieve their career goals. Thus, funding opportunities for women scientists, such as the Lasse Garten Foundation Career Development Award in honor of RBG, are critical and essential to improving gender equality and will no doubt help us early career women scientists become more successful. I was born in Henan province in China, and I'm the only child in my family. I grew up surrounded by tons of love from my beloved parents, grandparents, uncle, and aunts. Although I was a girl, I was free to do everything, playing video games and basketball with boys, learning dancing with girls, and watching my grandpa, a mathematician, solving math problems. The love and freedom in my childhood benefited me, making me a positive
an open-minded person with self-confidence. I'm proud to be a woman, and I never felt that being a woman was a hindrance to my personal development or career advancement. When there was no women's basketball team in middle school, I built my own basketball team, encouraged girls in other classes to start their teams, and organized a women's basketball league. I like challenges, so I led a research group to work on the riskiest part of the cellular reprogramming project when I was in graduate school, and we did an excellent job. I follow my heart. When I started working on KRAS targeted therapy resistance in pancreatic cancer in 2014, many colleagues didn't understand me, and I also had problems getting fellowships. They either didn't believe that KRAS inhibitors would be in the market in the near future, or thought that KRAS inhibitors would cure KRAS mutant cancers. Our studies suggest that combination therapy is required to enhance the anti-tumor effect of KRAS inhibitors and prevent therapy resistance. I'm very grateful to be supervised by two great mentors, Dr. Honghui Deng and Ron DePinho, who trusted me and gave me a chance and patience to prove myself. Like men, we women have the passion and ability to do a good job and lead. As a principal investigator of a research lab at Rutgers University, I focus on developing novel therapeutics for pancreatic cancer research using genetically engineered mouse models and the latest single-cell technologies. My research aims to understand the role of cells in the tumor microenvironment in regulating tumor cell responses to KRAS inhibition, the most frequently mutated oncogene in pancreatic cancer. While preclinical data reveals that KRAS inhibitors are potent in inducing tumor cell death, the response is short-lived. My previous study suggests that non-tumor cells in the tumor microenvironment, particularly macrophages, are responsible for therapy resistance. Macrophages are hyperplastic and multifunctional, forming a reciprocal relationship with tumor cells and contributing to an immune-suppressive tumor microenvironment. To combat this resistance, our funded project aims to identify macrophage subpopulations that promote KRAS-targeted therapy resistance in pancreatic cancer by characterizing the heterogeneity of tumor-associated macrophages. We also aim to dissect the intercellular crosstalk between macrophages and tumor cells, as well as between macrophages and effector immune cells, such as T lymphocytes. Our goal is to eliminate or reprogram the pro-resistance macrophage subpopulation or interfere with the pro-resistance intercellular crosstalk to sensitize pancreatic cancer cells to KRAS inhibition and reduce the risk of cancer recurrence. Although pancreatic cancer is challenging to treat, I'm hopeful that the combination of KRAS-targeted therapy and immunotherapy will change the landscape. I'm dedicated to this work. Lastly, I want to express my gratitude to the Lasse Garten Foundation for giving me the opportunity to share my stories and research with you. I hope to serve as a role model and inspire more women to pursue careers in pancreatic cancer research, with the ultimate goal of finding a cure. The best way to honor Justice Ginsburg's contributions to women's rights is to follow her spirit, and demonstrate the power of women in fighting for a more inclusive and equal environment. We need each other's support. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Howe. I'd like to welcome you. Thank you. I loved your story about your starting a basketball team. I was watching something on Morning Joe this morning about International Women's Day, and Billie Jean King was on talking about the importance of sports and how sports teaches leadership and can help guide us for the rest of your life. And I think it probably also helped you learn that high risk and high reward ventures can be very rewarding, and clearly your prescient insights into KRAS inhibition and your dedication to following your heart, no matter what people said to you, has clearly led to some very exciting work on your part.
Yeah, thank you for the comments, and I really feel grateful for giving me this to award me and giving me a chance to share my stories. Thank you.
And as a Jersey girl, shout out to Rutgers. So thank you.
Thank you.
And now I'm pleased to welcome our next session. This is our final session with our luminaries. I'm very pleased to welcome our moderator, Dr. Summer Bazzuro. Dr. Bazzuro serves as IPG Health's Chief Medical Officer, elevating their network's unmatched expertise in medical strategy. Dr. Bazzuro holds a PhD in cell growth and cancer from the University of Pennsylvania Medical School, a BS Research Intensive in Molecular Biology from Yale University, and was a postdoctoral research fellow at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Dr. Bazzuro is a member of ASCO. She serves on the Lustgarten Board of Directors and chairs the board's Science and Research Committee. Welcome, Dr. Bazzuro.
Thank you, Linda. We asked the Rising Stars to ask questions of our luminaries, and I'm looking forward to hearing how each of you responds. But first, let's introduce our panel. We have Dr. Cristina Ferroni. She's the chair of surgery at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. She's a pancreatic and hepatobiliary surgeon who focuses her clinical and basic science research on neoadjuvant therapy for pancreatic adenocarcinoma and cholangiocarcinoma. She has been the PI of multiple investigator-initiated clinical trials and is the current PI of the Alliance 21806 trial for resectable pancreatic adenocarcinoma. We also have Dr. Christine Icabosio Donahue, and she is the David N. Rubenstein Center Chair for Pancreatic Cancer Research and the Director, Center for Pancreatic Research at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Dr. Icabosio Donahue's lab also investigates the fundamental evolutionary mechanisms underlying metastases using pancreatic cancer as their model tumor type. As of this week, Dr. Icabosio Donahue is the newly appointed editor-in-chief of the AACR journal. Congratulations, Cancer Research. And finally, we also have, Dr. Zhenjian Ye. She is a professor in the departments of surgery and pharmacology at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. She's also vice chair of research in the Department of Surgery and co-director of clinical research at the UNC Lineberger Comprehensive Cancer Center. Dr. Ye's lab identifies and studies novel therapeutic targets for the treatment of pancreatic cancer. And of course, welcome back to Dr. Jennifer Knox. So with that, I would love to get to the questions to our very esteemed panel. And the first question is, what do you envision as the biggest challenge for an early cancer detection test? And I'm going to start out with you, Dr. Knox.
Okay. Thank you. So probably the hardest question you could ask a clinician, and especially as applied to pancreatic cancer. Nothing could be more important than this work, because obviously finding cancer much earlier stage is going to impact survival in this dreadful disease. I think if we learn lessons from other cancers, we know that you have to enrich for a population that you screen Otherwise, you get an awful lot of, false positives and false negatives or just noise. And so I think that's been particularly challenging in pancreas cancer, because even the risk factors that we identify do not really predict for most of the diseases we've seen. But I'm optimistic now that the science, and we've heard some of that today with liquid biopsies, that I think the science, if it gets to the place where, we have the confidence in the specificity and the sensitivity of the assay, the rest we can work out. We can decide how to screen people and apply it appropriately. So I guess I said two things there: selection and the advancement of the science now.
Thank you, Dr. Knox. Dr. Ferroni, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just echo what Dr. Knox said. She's a world expert. And as she said, I think it's an issue of enriching the population and making sure that you have the specificity and sensitivity so that you don't get distracted by the noise. But it is the key to us saving more people from pancreatic cancer.
Absolutely, and hopefully successful trial outcomes. Okay, our next question, Dr. Yeh, I'm going to ask you first. What do you see as the greatest opportunity for impact in patients with metastatic disease in the future?
I think that a lot of the rising stars have already alluded to the promise, I think, of the future in treating metastatic pancreatic cancer. I think that as we start to be able to understand the tumor and the tumor microenvironment and the immune microenvironment better, we can attack tumors on many different fronts. And that's what we really need to really move the needle forward. And as we have more options in the last 10 years, we've had an explosion of options. And I think that that is just going to accelerate. We have a chance to really slow down metastatic disease. And I think what that happens is if you look at other tumors like colon cancer, metastatic colon cancer and metastatic melanoma, what that allows us to do is to really change the biology of the tumors. And sometimes it even allows us as surgeons and Dr. Ferroni to go back in and take out the metastatic site. We've done that now with melanoma and with colon cancer, and the survival for colon cancer patients with metastatic disease, if they can get more surgery for the metastatic disease, is 40% and sometimes 10 years. And I think that's the hope for pancreatic cancer, as we can attack the cancer from many, many different fronts and have essentially sequential therapies to keep at it.
Thank you, Dr. Yeh. Dr. Iacobuzio, what do you see as the greatest opportunity of impact for these metastatic patients?
If I have to say one thing, I think targeted therapy for RAS is going to be a game changer for all patients, unequivocally. And I'm excited to see what the next few years are going to bring. And, RAS happens so early in the process of developing a pancreas tumor. It's one of the few things that is in every cell of the tumor. The more it grows, there's so much variability. But KRAS is kind of a fundamental, foundational aspect of a pancreatic cancer. And so, if we can knock out the foundation of the tumor, everything else comes crumbling down. And KRAS controls so many things that our Rising Stars alluded to. By the way, outstanding presentations, everyone. I really enjoyed it. And what Jen said. So KRAS.
Great.
Yep.
Thank you. All right, this question is for you specifically, Dr. Iacobuzio. So how do you balance between clinical practice as a surgical pathologist and as a scientist?
The way I balanced it is I gave up clinical practice 10 years ago. There's this, especially when you're starting out your career, there's these terms like you're a triple threat. You're doing clinical work and you're doing research and you're teaching. And I just had reached a point in my life that I was kind of burned out. And I said, if I can only do one thing, what could it be? So I wanted to put my eggs into the research basket. I enjoyed the clinical work, absolutely. But it was just a difference in and research is always changing. Whereas my clinical practice was, very routine material, challenging material, but research every day is something new. And I was excited to see how far I could go if I devoted all of my time to research. So the balance really comes down to the individual and what are the different priorities in their life. And if you love work and you want to work 80 hours a week, 90 hours because you absolutely love it, then you're not out of balance. You're happy, right? But if there are other things in your life that are important to you, you have to make a judgment on which to prioritize. And that judgment has to come from yourself, not from your mentors or your chairman or people like that. You have to have a conversation with them about what's going on in your life, but you have to be your own best advocate. You are your own best advocate for carving out the life and the career that you want.
Thank you for that. And that leads us to another question about work-life balance. So the question is, how do you navigate balancing responsibilities at home, such as taking care of young children or elderly parents, and also furthering your career? Dr. Ferroni, you want to take that one to start?
Yeah, I would echo what Dr. Iacobuzio said. It's about what makes you really happy. And then it's not work. Yes, it's work, but you enjoy it, right? And finding your own balance is so, so important. But I do think that, when you have kids or aging parents, the most important thing is flexibility. And if you can make your schedule, that significantly reduces your stress. And for my husband, who's also a surgeon, and it was really important to be home for dinner at 5:30, 6 o'clock, put the kids to bed when they were younger, and then we would both start doing work again. And that worked for us rather than staying late and getting home and not needing to do anything. But obviously, as your family situation changes, you need to be able to feel like you can do what you need to do for your kids, for your parents, for your friends, for your own well-being. And then you become a happier person, a more balanced person. And I think you're more productive because you are not resentful of your work because you're able to address what you need to do.
Very true. And there are people who are sandwiched between having to care for both young children and elderly parents. Dr. Yeh, what are your thoughts on this balancing responsibilities?
Well, number one, I don't do it very well.
I didn't say I did it well, Jen.
And not as smart as Dr. Iacobuzio O'Donoghue to prioritize one over the other. Instead, sort of in the space of I guess never really balancing well. But I think that it's I think family, whatever your family structure is really important. I think that one thing that was different for me that helped was actually coming to the University of North Carolina as my first job. Because I think the culture here, I find that at the Cancer Center and also the institution, that there is I find that both faculty and trainees do prioritize their family life and their priorities, outside work priorities as well. So it almost makes it okay to be more flexible, like Dr. Ferroni is saying, like it is just okay. And so that's been really helpful. I think, of course, having a really supportive family is also helpful. I have a physician who's a husband, but we're very equitable. I think my kids would probably argue that he does more than I do at home. So, I think that having a supportive structure, whatever that structure is really important. Having the leadership when you're going into your first job that's actually supportive and understanding of whatever your values are is also really important. And I was fortunate enough to have that when I first started out.
Thank you. Okay. So switching gears a little bit, what skills, scientific or otherwise, do you encourage your trainees to learn? Dr. Knox.
So I think everyone, especially if they show great promise, whether it's within medicine or within science, I think everyone benefits from a little bit of communication and leadership training, even if it's a course or something. I've seen many very, gifted young people kind of get themselves into situations, or they put their foot in their mouth, or problems over really perhaps not ideal communication within a collaborative or collegial environment. And there are a lot of pressures. I didn't invent the 24-hour rule, but I use it all the time. Never send an email when you're angry. And I was encouraged to go to some leadership training early on, and I'm not sure I thought I needed it, but the things you learn about how to be diplomatic and communicate better is so important. It helps you wherever you go, I think, in your career. So I try to direct people to get a little bit of that while they're doing everything else.
Great point.
Excellent point. Dr. Ferrone, what about you?
Yeah, no, I think I would echo everything that Dr. Knox says. I'm going to consistently go after Dr. Knox. That way I can just say I agree with everything she says, because, I just feel so fortunate. I mean, the speakers are so great and inspiring, and it shows what's coming up ahead and the young generation and how inspirational they are. But, my friends here on this call really, are amazing, and they really help you develop your career. And I think that is probably the most important thing that I learned along the way is collaboration. And that's what makes it a lot more fun, to be perfectly honest. It makes it more engaging. And I think we all know we can't be an expert in everything. And if we bring what we're passionate about to the table, to the conversation, and we share and collaborate, I think that's probably what I've enjoyed the most in my career. And I would say that has made it, the most productive and the most fun.
Okay. Well, one of the things that can help us with supporting our careers are mentors. So the next question is, who are your mentors and how did you choose them? Dr. Yeh.
So I think I don't know that I've ever chosen a mentor. I firmly believe that your best mentors are usually organic, and many times are the result of serendipity. I had my first mentor in science was actually when I was a technician, and at Dana-Farber with Bill Kalin. But he, I'm not sure that I understood what he conveyed to me when I was working with him. But, in retrospect, he really taught me how important it was to think scientifically and rigorously and systematically. And that's, that was a long time ago, but that's really carried with me. And I've had other mentors who also around the same time period, Bill Sellers, who's now at the Broad, who taught me to sort of think outside the box and the enthusiasm that a mentor brings. And I think, I won't take up all the time, but I think there's also sponsors that are really important who really look out for you and give you opportunities. And I think that's something that Dr. Ho sort of alluded to. And I think that people on this call in the Lustgarten Foundation has been wonderful at giving people opportunities, but to really spread opportunities around is really important to make each other successful and to build the collaborations that Dr. Ferrone talked about.
Thank you, Dr. Yeh. Dr. Iachobuzzi-O'Donoghue, who are your mentors and how did you choose them?
Yeah, I starting out with did not choose a mentor. I think the mentor chose me. I'm referring to Ralph Ruban at Hopkins, where I did my residency. But the thing about mentoring is it's very hard to mentor somebody who doesn't want to be mentored, right? It's an effort, and it's very painful if the person doesn't care. So I think when somebody, and it's probably everybody on this panel right now, when you're perceived as somebody who's a go-getter and interested in, or, then somebody who likes to mentor will gravitate towards you. So I think that's happened with Ralph. I was motivated, and Ralph is always motivated to be a mentor. So he was really instrumental in my career. But I also, Ralph is not the only one. Scott Kern, who I did my postdoc with, but I've come to think of mentors as career consultants, because they can give you advice about a situation, but you're not obligated to take it. And I received advice in the beginning of my career that was very well-intentioned, with my best interest in mind, and I ignored it and did what I wanted to do anyway, because ultimately I think the most important influence in my life was my mother, who just always taught me, never give up, never give in, just always try your best. And so I've never taken no for an answer. And I don't mean in a social setting, something inappropriate. I mean, within the professional setting, I don't take no for an answer. I just keep going. And that's how I've been able to knock down a lot of walls, I think, is, again, it comes back to the advocating for myself. But also the final thing I'll say is I'm always on the lookout, and this is even at the level of my career now, I'm always on the lookout for who is somebody who really understands the ins and outs of how things work at that institution or organization or whatever it is that you want to succeed in. That's the person to gravitate towards, that I would meet with them and introduce myself and say, this is what I'm interested in, this is what I want to do, what would you suggest? And I've always done that. And yeah, so in order to be mentored, you have to be what's the word I'm looking for? Receptive, yeah, receptive, yes, thank you. I'm a scientist, not a linguist, right? So that's my perspective on mentoring.
And certainly important to find those persons that understand the unwritten rules of whatever framework that you're.
Ralph was somebody that knew the rules down to the fine print. And that's what he taught me, and that's what I try to pass on to others.
Okay. Dr. Ferroni, one last point on this type of question around mentorship. What's important then for individuals when they're considering being a good mentor to others?
I think listening, and making sure that you're not putting your own priorities on your mentee, but rather guiding. And I think the only way that you can do that is by really listening to what they're passionate about. But sometimes we like to hear what we like to hear, which is, oh, you're passionate about what I'm passionate about. And you have to sometimes stop yourself and say, that's not really what they said to you, but rather, they want to take things in a little bit of a different direction. And I have to say, plenty of my mentees have been absolutely right in terms of, a direction that they took research, either clinical or more translational. So I think that we as mentors have a lot to learn from our mentees as we listen.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so we talked about mentorship. I want to ask the question now, what has anchored you during difficult times in your career? Dr. Knox, what has helped to anchor you?
So I think as a medical oncologist, there's lots of difficult times. I think everyone has kind of said it in different ways. I think we have to have balance in our lives. We have to have enjoyment outside of our work, despite how much we love our work. We have to have our family and our friends and, even a hobby. I'm a bit of a passionate gardener. These are things that you can kind of go to and clear your mind and refresh, which are absolutely important. I worry about people who don't have that. I think as a medical oncologist, I think as much as I love my practice and my patients, I think it has always been the research, because the research is what actually gives me optimism. You know, when you think back on how things have changed even over the last decade, it's quite remarkable. And so that in a way gets me through some tough days as well, because I just keep thinking it's getting better. So all of that.
Okay. I think we have time for one more question, and I want to give everyone a chance to respond. And this is something that I get asked a lot. I know people starting out in their careers always want to know, what's something you wish you had known when you were an earlier stage in your career? So let's start with you first, Dr. Yeh. Something you wish you would have known.
Goodness. I think the first thing is that it's okay to try and take some time to think about things and think about the direction that you want to grow in, and to establish those mentors and sponsors to really guide you so that you're not really operating in a vacuum. I think that that's really important. I was fortunate enough, I think, to not, have a lot of support here at the Cancer Center with the Cancer Center director, as well as other people. I think having both a clinical practice and a research practice makes that even more important, because you need to sort of find people who sort of have the experience that you can look up to. And I think the other thing is to listen and to not take things personally. I think that resilience is something that we build, especially through medical school and through all of the PhD research training as well. And, there's nothing more, I have logarithmically more failures than successes. So I think that resilience is really important, but it's what you learn, I think, from those failures that is so important. I think I see a lot of more junior people and trainees too give up on research sometimes because it's hard, or something didn't work, or a manuscript got rejected. Dr. Iacobuzio. But that's like the way to, it makes you better when you step back and think about, okay, what is it that I'm conveying or that I did that might be able to change things? Like, how can I sort of pivot to make myself better? I think in all avenues. I think that works in medicine, in surgery, in research. I think that that's the most important thing, is to build that resilience and to take feedback, whether it's constructive or more critical, that it's not personal. There are actually ways to, you can overcome that. So I think that that's something that's really important as you move along.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Iacobuzio Donoghue?
I don't, the answer that's immediately popped in my mind, and the only one I have, I don't know if it helps with this panel. I think it would be that, one day you will become a mom, because my husband was also in residency. He was in residency at the same time, and then he was in the military, and he was always deploying, and between work and life, starting a family was always pushed off. And it was always that one thing that, I was always worried, is my job getting in the way of, starting a family. I think it did, actually, because when we finally wanted to try, we dealt with infertility for years, and it felt like a huge failure as a woman. But things work out, because I now have an adopted son who is the best, funniest, greatest kid that he was who I was meant for, and everything worked out the way it was meant for, and even now he's 12, and I was just looking at him yesterday when he was sleeping and just thinking, like, you are just the best kid. And all those years of suffering through infertility in private, People say, you're so successful. How do you get so much done? It was like, because I have a husband that works a lot and I don't have children. And I didn't consider that as a benefit for myself. So if I would have known back then, you will become a parent, Chris, and it's going to be amazing. So now I feel like I have the best of both worlds. I was able to do things in my career and accomplish a lot because I didn't have childcare. And now I have flexibility in my job, as Christine said, right? To be a mom and go to every single basketball game and baseball game, and I love it. But that's my answer. That's what came through to me.
Thank you for that honesty. Dr. Ferroni, what about you?
After that, I'm not sure I have much to add. Oh, goodness gracious. No, but I think, exactly. I think there's different times in your life that you have to adjust your life in different ways. And I think sometimes it gets very stressful when you feel like you're doing kind of a bad job at everything, and, clinically, if a patient isn't doing as well as you'd hoped, you get a rejection letter from the manuscript you submitted, the grant comes back with a bad score, and you think to yourself, oh my gosh, I've sort of bumbled everything. And it's just a matter of balance. And there's always these ups and downs, but you just don't let the downs get you down. Enjoy the good ones, enjoy the highs to their maximum, but don't let the downs get you down, because it does even out. And as time goes on, you also realize a lot of the things that you got upset about in the beginning, they just didn't really matter. And that rejection, it was fine. And as Dr. Ye said, you learn something from that rejection.
Dr. Knox.
Yeah, it's so hard to add anything to all of that, and lots of similar experiences in my life. I think the thing that popped into mind first was more career oriented, and I tell my trainees this, and that is don't be thin skinned in the beginning. That in those early days, one of the things I regret is if I put in a grant and the rating came back and it was poor, but often wrong, right? Like often they misunderstood the importance of something, and time would show that I was right. Getting too obsessed about that and complaining about it or becoming more isolated was just not the thing to do. Really, everyone says this, I just didn't do it when I was young. Just tweak it and send it out again, right? And that kind of thick-skinned, because there's so many opinions and so much competition in that. And I think in the end, if you're dedicated and you're interested and you're passionate about your work, you're going to succeed. And so that's really the only regret I kind of have early on, is I kind of wish I'd just been a little tougher, but time makes you tough.
Sure does. Thank you to all of our luminaries and for all of the submitted questions. Great conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks to you all.
Thank you. And thank you, Linda, for leading Lustgarten. And Lustgarten is an inspirational organization for all of us. And I feel very privileged to be included. So thank you.
I am so thrilled that all of you took so much of your time to be here today, but I'd like to just shout out to all the moms out there who taught us not to sit down and shut up, and taught us to stand up for what we believe in. And of course, to all of you who are raising amazing children while doing such important research. And that is so important to your families and so important to us who are counting on you for the next breakthroughs in pancreatic cancer research. And thank you all for your resilience and for learning through failures. What a better testament to all of you than to the fact that you just stuck to it, even when your papers and manuscripts were weren't accepted, or when you whatever was happening with your mentors and professors, and you had not great days, and but now you're here and you're at the top institutions, and we just are so grateful for all of your hard work.